Thank you for joining us today for the meeting of the Management Committee here on July 12th. We do have a quorum, so we will get started. With that, I will, without objection, if there are no changes to this agenda, we can move ahead and assume that it's approved. Is there anybody that wants to change anything on the consent agenda? Okay, then without objection, the agenda is approved. We also received the draft meeting minutes from June 14th that everyone's had a chance to review in their packets. And with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the draft minutes from the June 14th Management Committee.
So moved.
Moved by Lilligren, seconded by Osman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And aye for me. If I don't say anything, I'd say yes. Sorry, I'm reading. Yes. All right. All right, now we move on to non-consent business items and reports of standing committees. So our first item is 2023-142. It's the state transit funding allocation policy. And is Stewart here to welcome Stewart? I really enjoyed reading the report on this, and I'd heard about it coming out of the legislature, but this is a good one for this committee, certainly. And we welcome you today to walk us through all of this.
Appreciate it. Good afternoon, members. I'm Stewart McMullan, Director of Operations and Budget here at the Council. I'm going to discuss business item 2023-142, which amends Council Policy FM 12-3. My preferred pronouns are he, him, and his. First, some background on why we're changing this policy at this time, which is entirely dictated by legislative action on the motor vehicle sales tax, or MVEST, this past session. A brief summary of the changes to MVEST from this past session would include a change to the tax rate prescribed in Minnesota statutes 297B.02, changing the rate from 6.5% to 6.875%, and a corresponding change to the council's share of MVEST revenues dictated in statutes 297B.09 from 36% of the revenue to 34.3% of the revenue. The collective change to the council MVEST revenues in June, as forecast by the Minnesota Department of Revenue, is about $1 million a year, including the increased rate and the change in our share. The bill was signed by Governor Walz on May 24th and is effective July 1st, 2023, which makes this a time-sensitive item for the council. This business item changes the published council policy and internal council procedure that governs how these MVEST funds are allocated between the council and suburban transit providers, with the exception of one material change, reducing the supplemental share of MVEST from 14.5 to 12.8%. The other changes are for grammar, capitalization, updated reporting requirements, and conforming to the council's policy format. There aren't any new requirements or changes to the requirements in the policy. The business item contains a marked up version of both the policy and procedure, showing all of the edits, and it also includes clean copies of what the new policy and procedure would look like. I'm not planning to walk through every edit with you, but we'll discuss the material change to the policy in some detail. The change to the policy and procedures have been shared and reviewed by the Metropolitan Council Policy Review Team, the Office of General Counsel, our Office of Communications, and the MTS and Regional Administration Executive and Financial Teams. So the allocation of MVEST funds is directed by Minnesota Statutes 473.388, Subdivision 4, and Council Policy FM 12-3. The policy was last materially revised in December of 2017, business item 2017-280, same week. That policy change was the result of a long and intense negotiation between my predecessor and Charles Carlson's predecessor and the suburban transit providers that took almost all of calendar year 2017. The policy was then revised again in 2021 to conform to current policy structure and format. I'll describe now the material impact of the change in this policy. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to be throwing a lot of percents at you, and as I describe the material change of this. The MVest allocation to the council and to each of the 12 suburban transit providers is the sum of two calculations. First, what we call the statutorial pool, which is dictated by Minnesota Statutes 473.388 subdivision 4, where in narrative form it stipulates that 21.5% of the 36% is a function of 2001 transit assistant grants and 2001 and 2006 taxable market values in the communities they represent. This pool remains fixed by Minnesota statutes and was not changed this year. Each of the providers' share of that pool is also in the procedure and dictated by that statute. And secondly, what is most often called the supplemental pool, dictated by the 2017 negotiated agreement I alluded to earlier between the councils and the suburban transit providers, and is memorialized in Council Policy 12.3 and Procedure 12.3A. 14.5% of the 36% is a function of the negotiated financial need and sharing of funds across all providers as negotiated and determined in 2017. Each provider's share of that pool is also included in the procedure. The changes to the council's allocation and change to each suburban transit provider is a function of how much of the share they have in each of those pools. Overall, the council had received 88.0% of MVest under the old model and will receive a slightly smaller share of 87.6% of MVest in the new model. Suburban transit providers had collectively received 12.0% of MVest in the old model and will receive 12.4% under the new model. But, and most importantly, with the increase in the tax rate, the pie is larger and all entities will receive more funds than if the rate had stayed the same and the share had stayed the same. This policy will adjust the distribution of MVest dollars for the month we're now in July, and the distribution of those funds that will take place in August. The proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council adopts policy FM 12-3 and the accompanying procedure. So with that summary, I can answer any questions the committee might have, or if you would like to walk through a detailed example of the before and after the policy calculation.
Are there any questions? I just have two. With a slight decrease but overall increase in funding, it's projected again that $1 million net increase for Met Council. What is the net increase, do we know, for the suburban transit providers after we got to this place?
If you were to think of it as 1% of MVest is $3.6 million. We receive, Madam Chair, $360 million a year, okay? The revised share for the suburbans is an increase of 0.4%, okay? So
400,000.
Unscaled, that would be correct, Madam Chair.
Wow,
okay.
My math teacher somewhere back in the day would be really cool, and I didn't use my phone on that one. Okay, that's good, because there are many of us that have suburban transit providers, and we've been on both sides of this thing where I'm pushing for the stuff that we talked about earlier, but it's just good that we know that, I know there's a net increase, but overall there's a net increase for suburban providers percentage-wise, but overall there's still more money coming in.
Madam Chair, that's correct. Everybody will have received more money than they would have received under the old rates and old share.
Okay. And then if you do have an example that you really want to share with us, please feel free. The only other question I had is, are we still operating under the 60-40? Metro gets up to 40% of MVest and the rest is going to the greater Minnesota. Has that been changed over the years?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I believe what you're alluding to is the share of MVest where we had received 34.6 and now we receive 34.3. The incremental share, if you will, what the legislature did was try to hold essentially the Met Council harmless and say you're going to get about the same amount, almost exactly the same amount of invest. The incremental, most of the incremental found money, if you will, by increasing the rate went to rural transit programs through the Minnesota Department of Transportation.
And I saw the ones I think that they had noted too that we're going to see those increases. Okay. Would anyone here like to hear the example, or if they're otherwise?
Madam Chair, I would warn you in advance, it's a detailed spreadsheet and I'd be glad to do it, but we're then walking through advanced algebra.
Okay, great. We appreciate all the work that you did on that and gave you an A+. But we want to make sure that we're mindful of our agenda today. So I think, thank you for walking through all the changes. I know it's been a feat, especially through the negotiations that the legislature did here, but it is good news and we're grateful for that new money. The only other thing that I saw in here, and I'm sure that this is all carryover language because it wasn't redlined or anything in the edits, but it is very prescriptive as to what level money has to be spent first, and then it always looks like bus service kind of comes last. Is that correct, or am I reading that incorrectly?
Madam Chair, that's a prescription when they were working on, and again, this was kind of 2017, when they were working on the part of the calculation to determine need, they laid out, here is the order in which we will do this. And so in this revision, we didn't want to kind of unilaterally change sort of the prescription. This specifically and materially only changes the MVEST allocation and the distribution between suburbans and the council.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Seeing no other questions or comments, I'd entertain a motion to that the Metropolitan Council adopt FM 12-3 version 3 state transit funding allocation policy. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Lilligren, is there a second? Second by Osmond. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. That passes unanimously, so thank you, Stewart. Appreciate that great presentation. Now we will be hearing from Chief Information Officer Craig Bantz, who will talk about the Peoplesoft Administration Support Contract that we have before us, which is 22P147, and it's item 2023-152. So, hi Craig, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Council members. It's a pleasure to speak with you again today. So this business item pertains to outsourcing a function of our work inside the IS department. Our Peoplesoft system is our primary ERP, or the system that we really use to do major tasks like finance and HR. Such large systems like this are complex and require multiple teams and roles to successfully implement. We're actually in the process of investing in this system further as part of our broader enterprise improvement or enterprise systems improvement project. So we imagine that these core ERP systems will continue to play a critical role for the council into the future. One of these diverse roles that we need to support the ERP system is Peoplesoft administration support. And so what this role does is it ensures that critical software updates and compliance updates are applied to these systems. We've historically had one specialist in the information services department for the HR part of the system and one specialist for the finance part of the Peoplesoft system. We had something we are all happy to celebrate, which is a retirement after many wonderful years of service inside the IS department at the end of 2021, and we lost one of our Peoplesoft administration roles at the time. We have been attempting to fill that role without a lot of success, and in the meantime been contracting temporary staffing resources to fill the role. After a number of rounds of searches, the manager of the respective area really reevaluated our approach, and it occurred to us that there might be a more efficacious methodology to meet this need for the council. Even if we were successful in attracting somebody for the role, we would still have a very narrow bench, if this makes sense. We've only ever had one person in HR and one person for finance aspects of this work. So we could just be, a few short months or years away from another retirement and having the same conversation and struggling to maintain operations. And so with that realization, we spoke to a number of our peer organizations, Hennepin County, the City of St. Paul, et cetera, to ask how they were tackling with their similarly sized IT operations and similar technology, how they were tackling this role. And it became very clear that our peers had adopted what is an industry common model of outsourcing this small piece of the overall operation of our enterprise resource planning systems to a third party. And the reason for this is that it is a highly scalable piece of work. If you learn how to do the compliance for, Hennepin County and Ramsey County, if you figured out how to do that in the system for one customer, it's pretty easy to replicate it for everybody. But where we were having to kind of reinvent the wheel each time a new compliance or security mandate came out. So for our 2023 budget, we submitted a supplemental request proposing to evaluate outsourcing the solution and conducted a RFP solicitation. We received a number of respondents and found that not only were there an established group of service providers who could do this work, but that those service providers actually offered more compelling cost structures than insourcing the work has historically meant for us. So in the long run, this will be a cost savings for the council. So our proposal is to hire one of these firms in 3 one-year increments so that we are sure that we're satisfied with the service. So each year we have a moment of reflection to make sure it is working as intended. And then not to fill the vacancy we currently have. And then as our other vacancy retires in the near future, also not to fill that, instead work in this outsource model. There'll be a little bit of increased costs initially as we transition, but that period should only be a few months.
Okay. Are there anything else on this?
No, thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions? Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was looking at the kind of the business item, and so we're asking for approval to actually approve a specific vendor that you've already selected.
That is correct. We
As
ran
I'm a
a
reading through
solicitation, and this was found to be.
And then there wasn't MCUB goal was set on this. Did you get any solicitations or vendors, MCUB vendors that
My
applied?
understanding is that there were some respondents that were MCUBs and were not found to be able to advance the further rounds of the review process. It requires a great deal of skill to do, or scale, not skill, excuse me, in order to execute this work. So it makes it challenging to do in a small business environment, and I think that is predominantly the reasoning why OEO did not set a goal on this.
So as a follow-up, so I've been a consultant, so would you kind of look to have a small team of people assigned to the Met Council, so you always have a backup, but not everybody in the universe work on it, that there's kind of a stable of people who are assigned to the council. So there's always a key person and a backup person. Is that how you're formulating this process?
Yes, this vendor proposed a model in which we would have, key regular points of contact, but the vendor would also be responsible for ensuring continuity if those points of contact were available or there was a change in their staffing.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you for asking those questions because those were some on mine as well. So, Craig, can you just tell me too, we've got one position open now, there would be a second one coming because we would plan to not fill the other, I think, finance piece of it you said. So, how many, in just the first year increment, how many people will they be bringing over as consultants to work for us for this first tranche of the $750,000, which is how much again?
It's $250 a year.
Okay.
And we are anticipating 2 primary contacts from the vendor with a number of, and initially there'll be a project manager helping run the transition and some ancillary roles that won't be with us indefinitely. And then those 2 primaries will have backups that also, will be involved enough to know what the status of work is, but will not be daily operating.
So 3 people, how many full-time equivalents is that, do you think?
Well, we are actually, so they have proposed this as a scope of work and not defined it in a number of hours, if that makes sense. So we're paying for a particular scope of work. And so it would be hard for me to extrapolate their assessment of how many hours that is of their people.
Great. That's something that I think, I understand that. It's just that, again, I know we've pushed a lot of money towards information systems, trying to patch and, get temporary or other permanent people in place. And how long have we had Peoplesoft again?
We implemented Peoplesoft in the late 90s.
Okay, wow. Well, there's some golden handcuffs there. Yeah, but if you've been in government a while, you know about that, so, okay. And then you will reevaluate then every year?
That's correct. So this authorizes us to approve up to 3 one-year contracts. So each year we would reflect on with the vendor on the quality of service, whether it's meeting your needs, and if we're satisfied, then we would enter another year, up to 3 total.
Okay. And then, Craig, 3 years goes by pretty fast, and the evaluation for your first year is going to have to start, let's say, before you decide to move into a second year, but you'll probably feel pretty good about moving into a second year if it's going pretty well. But what do we do in year 4 and 5 and 10 and on?
Really, at the conclusion or towards the end of year 2, we need to reevaluate our approach and most likely solicit for services again, assuming that the outsource model serves us well.
Okay. And then is there ever a point in time by which we would look back at PeopleSoft or are all the systems essentially like this because they're just so complex?
Yeah, that is a broader question. And so right now there is a large enterprise systems improvement project going on with a real focus on what is one of our most critical business-facing systems, which is our enterprise asset management systems. These do work order and asset management, so they help, determine it's time to replace the tires on a bus, and also assign the work, and then also replace the tires in inventory, etc.
Yeah.
And so that is the primary focus of our enterprise lens right now. Those systems are not as capable of meeting our needs, and that project really takes us through another couple of years. And as we exit that project, we'll update our roadmap for our enterprise systems as a whole, and we envision kind of being in a continuous improvement process thereafter.
And these peers that you considered, they were also PeopleSoft clients?
Yeah, Peoplesoft is the overwhelming solution amongst our peer group, and it is for HR and finance in particular.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as I read it, I'm comfortable. I understand where we're at, and I think that's that there's just that tension that you guys are living through that comes to us and saying, okay, we've got to make this move. We aren't getting it with our full-time employees anymore because retirements and market and all that. But it is signaling that the golden handcuffs are clearly on, and I'm glad to see that at least in the out years, after we get through the other analysis of the asset management, that we can move into this. I just know during my time on the city council, we were in Plymouth, we found ourselves in the same way with some systems that probably did a great job, but became very intense to continue moving forward and costly, and we had to unchain ourselves from that. Everybody in government's been through it, even private sector too, so.
Very true.
All right, any other questions on this? All right then, seeing none, the proposed action is to authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute contract 22P147 with Cherry Road Technologies, Inc. for the support of PeopleSoft systems for a not to exceed contract value of $750,000 over a 3-year period with 1-year reviews after each year of the 3 years. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Lilligren, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Cedarburg. And then the only other thing I had, were we able, is Cherry Road at all minority owned or
They are
female owned? Pardon me?
They do not qualify as name.
Just wondered. All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those no, say no. And that passes unanimously. So thank you for your hard work on this. And with all of these items that come before us, and I've been working, we'll talk a little bit about later, working with Phil, kind of to put a framework together to see, how these investments are moving, so that maybe even get a heads up before decisions like this can come, and just to check in on especially the staffing issues that the council's having. So good work, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right, we'll now move on to information items. Our first information item is general purpose levy strategy and preliminary regional administration budget allocations, and we've got Marie Henderson here, who's our acting CFO. Marie, thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. I am Marie Henderson. I'm the acting CFO, deputy CFO here at the council. And it's time to talk about 2024. This is the first of many presentations that you will see. Due to timing, I usually would have been here twice, at the end of June and the end of July. You're gonna see me just today, and we'll talk about the general levy and the RA allocation come August 9th. You'll see myself and a whole bunch of other financial folks in front of the council for a riveting presentation about the 2024 budget. Meanwhile, at the committees, they are receiving their presentation on their division level too. So today we are going to talk about the levy and the budget presentations and the timing of everything. We have statutory requirements here, and that's why I'm here today, and that we will go August 9th to the council. But before September 1st, we must approve a levy. That levy can be lowered in future months, but it cannot be raised, and we'll talk about the methodology here shortly. Then we'll go through capital program in October. We'll go to the council and you'll hear about all the capital. We will most likely also have a conversation at that time too on the operating side, which is unique this year, but that's because of transportation and some sales tax conversations that are happening now. We will have preliminary again in August 9th, but we'll have to probably revisit some of that in October with a public comment book coming out in October and holding that until December for public comment, and we must approve a unified budget by December 20. Just to remind you that the regional administrator shall recommend by statute for the council the adoption of measurements deemed necessary to have a budget and approved, and it is our unified budget that we will be building throughout the rest of this year. So I'm just going to focus on the levy right now. The levy has, the council has had a strategy for our levy for many years, and historically we have held our levy at 2%. In 2020, we actually changed that. We held it at 0%. We did not know. There are two components to our levy. One is a debt service levy that we must levy to cover those payments that happen. The other piece is the non-debt service, and we'll get into that too. So it's really a proud moment to say, though, that we have held our levy at 2%. This year, getting to the punchline, we will hold again at 2%, and there are pressures, though, that we need to be looking at. Like I said, the first part of our transit or our debt levy is that we must cover our payments. And there's two parts of our debt levy, and that is the first part is transportation. And you can see there are pressures. This graph is showing that in 2024, we're going to levy for about $50 million. If everything holds through at a 3% inflation rate, will it be at 67, which puts pressure then on the rest of the levy. Just graphically, there's just a lot of pressures between the debt and the non-debt side. The other side of making our payments is parks. Parks is it really depends on legislation, really depends on the grants, and so it does fluctuate heavier than transit. And again, we are levying to cover our payments based on the debt that was then issued. And so outstanding debt is 9.2, and our debt service levy this year will be 5.5%. The other side of this levy is the livable communities piece that is paid out of the non-debt. There's about three elements on this one. One is we receive $5 million from the annual regional fiscal disparity pool. That is levied actually by industrial, not homeowners. And we use that for helping clean up polluted land in the metropolitan area. Livable Communities demonstration account is proposed this year at 14.9 million. It is capped by the implicit price deflator. That is what comes out from the state. It maximizes what we can levy. And most years it's been 1% to 2%. Last year it was 8%, and this year it came in officially at 5.5%. And then we have statutory requirements for local housing incentive account, the $500,000 and $1 million from the general purpose levy that need to go into community development. So with all that putting together, the general purpose levy is the 14.85 that we just talked about, and the $1 million statutory, it leaves $3.13 million. Now in the 3 years back, we started equity grants, and you'll hear them shortly and starting that presentation of what they've done with that money. In 21 and 22, you approved that money going there. In 23, tying back into Craig's presentation, you approved it was 2.9 million last year and another 3 million to go towards the upgrading of our systems here at the council and being part of the solution and not having just the divisions pay for these large costs that are happening with the computer systems. This is just a real quick graphic to show you that when we hold our levy at 2%, we are the bottom blue light line. The other lines include cities, counties, school districts. So again, because of our predecessors, a really great story to talk about how we've held our levy, and we're very prudent about that. So we put it all together. The general purpose levy, which is our most flexible dollars at 5% increase, brings that to 18.98 million available. Again, being spent in community development, as we just previously talked about all the other categories. The demonstration account at 14.9, and the tax-based revitalization, which again is not part of our 2%, but we receive to the council. That top section again is the non-debt service levy, and the bottom section is our debt service levy, which again the 4.82 covers parks, and the pressure comes into transit. At this point, it shows a decrease, but again, we are levying to cover our payments, and that is still holding us at 2%. So even though it looks like a decrease in transit, we are still able to cover our debt service payments by even decreasing that number this year.
Can I just one, so what does it look like in 25, 26, 27? I know, the forecasting when you can always kind of figure out where we're going based on what the legislature's just done and where we're at and all the pressures. So that's, we're working on 24, but it's always interesting. Again, in my past life, they would talk about the next out year. We kind of passed a 2-year budget with the second year being basically set, but so at some point I'm sure you'll touch on that too. But
yeah, Madam Chair, I actually don't have a slide to show out the projections, but what it would look like is the top, we would have to be at the mercy of the implicit rate, and we would like to maximize those as much as possible. I would put in a forecast for around 2%. Again, inflation it was 8% last year when I was here, and now it's 5%. So I would guess around maybe even 3% hopefully next year, and we'll have a better story on inflation. And as far as our levy payments, we have those all forecasted out when we issue debt in spring of each year. They're 10-year, 20-year bonds, and we know what those payments are. So
great, thank you.
Any other questions on the levy?
Any questions? Right, Zena, keep going.
Okay. So now I'm going to flip over to regional administration and our budget allocation. Regional administration is, I would say for the most part, 100% allocated out to the divisions. There are pockets, so for example, Treasury is self-sustaining department and is paid by some of the interest off of our funds. But if you just think about all of these costs are allocated then out to the division, and what does that look like? So what that looks like is we are about 57% in salaries, and we are 31% of contracted services, and the rest is other. Other can be anywhere from supplies and travel, local travel, non-local travel, that type of thing. Uses by department, you will see that IS is our biggest department at 53%. Financial services, which is including our budget team, our contract team, procurement, real estate, and risk, is at 18%. 17% is our business services, which includes human resources and communications. And administrative services includes our chair office, the government affairs office, general counsel, internal audit, and OEEO. This proposal of $98 million is an increase of 10% from last year. And how that 10% breaks down. Salaries are include not only promotions, but a set rate of 3%. Now this is a preliminary budget, and I will say that probably come, if not, well, most likely won't be August, it'll probably most likely be October when you see the preliminary for public comment. That number will need to be adjusted based on contract negotiations.
And Marie, this is budgeted, of course, then you get actuals.
That's correct.
And we'll find out our actuals sometime next year for 2023. But again, do we budget for every authorized employee here, even though we know we have vacancies, or do we adjust that back? I think I've asked that before, but I just know that we've got continuing vacancies throughout the council, and I want to know which strategy we go with.
Sure, Madam Chair and council members. I have a couple slides on headcount. We budget for positions that are authorized, whether there are seats in them or not.
Okay, I thought so. Thank you.
Also within salaries and benefits, they'll see an adjustment. We'll be here in a month or so to talk about setting rates for our open enrollment and medical claims. We've had an increase in that area too, and working with the actuarial now to see what that and where we're going to land on that. So do anticipate some increases on that salary and benefit line. BPSI has been taken out of this slide in 23. It was listed as just operating, but as we are operating expense and as we are now progressing through, a lot of this can now start to be capitalized and it will be moved into a capital program, and that's why the decrease. So we have comparable budget, adopted budget to preliminary budget on this slide. So what is a true?
Just for everybody at home who's watching, so BPSI, is that self-insured? What is that?
Thank you.
Sorry.
So Madam Chair and council members, that is the programs, and Craig is going to have to help you with the initials soon, but it's the software programs that we're working on to upgrade our systems here at the council.
Okay.
Including asset management, timekeeping, business.
Process systems integration.
Okay, thank you.
We like an acronym.
Yeah,
Love our
because I know there's a lot of
acronyms.
people at home watching right now, and they're just, oh, what is
Great
that?
question.
Okay, so cool. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so overall, like I said, it's a 10% increase from regional administration to the divisions.
And just because I was trying to still figure out what the acronym was, where did that move to?
A capital program.
Okay.
And then, like I said earlier, we are pretty much 100%. There's that 1% that's not allocated out, that's other. Those expenses go to the divisions, and this is the year-over-year change for the divisions. We use a cost allocation method. We like to use direct cost allocating as much as possible, which means that if the services, say for environmental services, that indirect cost would go to environmental services. So we want to use that methodology as much as possible. When we don't know every item, like myself, I work with many divisions during the day, so my allocation is allocated across all of the divisions evenly.
And Marie, is it, I'm sure it is, you know, we've got Metro Transit covers our public safety as well. They're together in that budget. Is there a way, just for me or anybody else who might be interested, to just see the breakout of the public safety budget within Metro Transit so that we can see year over year what that's doing as well?
Yes, Madam Chair and committee members. This is the indirect cost allocation. So when we go to the council presentation, we just had the meeting, I think this week, that we talked about breaking out safety, and Leslie Canderas will be presenting in more detail with all of you, as you had asked, I believe, last year, for that more transparency on safety.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. I just think of all the things we do, safety is woven into everything we do, but certainly public safety, there wasn't any mention of it at last year's budget time. And considering all the really important things we're doing and the resources that we are applying, and I know we've now deployed some new contract support out there in the field. So I think it's important for us to get that year over year on that piece of the budget too, so that we can see where that's headed.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. And I want to remind you too, these costs are regional administration costs to the divisions. So
Okay.
regional administration does not have a safety division.
Gotcha. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Okay, so we'll get their full budget at another time. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
August 9th.
Yes, thank you.
So also to address your FTEs, these are the budgeted headcount for the year. It's an increase of 3.2 headcount. I will say that one of them was the 0.2 in finance is from Treasury, and that's because I have an employee that's been here 40 plus years, ready to retire, and that position is going to become a full-time when we post it. So that's the 0.2. The one HR position has already been approved through the June budget amendment. There has, for IS, there's 3.2 increase, and 2 of those you also approved in the June amendment from coming over from Metro Transit into IS. And real estate conversion, we had a 2-year temp convert to a full-time employee, which was also in the June budget amendment. So just to also give you a little bit more perspective, and I think that this has been asked, is what's the headcount by department and how has that been increasing? And that's what this slide is showing. We do have a vacancy factor in this budget, but I will say, and as you are aware, we have higher vacancies in other departments that are reflected in the budget, but maybe people aren't in those positions.
And Marie, not for today, obviously, and I know I've talked with Phil about this too, but separately, I think for this group, you know, the authorized strength versus, you know, where we're at currently, where we think we'll be 6 months or a year from now, or, well, all divisions would be great, but certainly the big critical divisions that decisions are coming through here about funding and all of that. So I think that would be good for this body to get a sense of, you know, what's going on as it relates to the trends in those positions and openings, and as we continue to invest, are we getting the ROI that we want? So things like that.
Okay. And Madam Chair, the one thing that we're evaluating too is really what is the need for the headcount, especially with the new funding sources that we have here at the council. You know, is that growth all in one division, or is RA being a shared service area needing to support more of these areas too? And that would be also reflective as we go through this budget process.
And I know Councilmember Lee isn't here today. He chairs audit. I formerly chaired audit. That was a very cool committee to sit on. And I really enjoy working with Matt Latour, who leads audit. And I just want to make sure that, you know, as this council becomes more ever complex and we have more, for sure in transportation, more systems coming online, you know, his department's got a lot on their plate. And that's our first line internally, finding out, okay, are we complying? Are, we're working with the feds and the state on things, but our own internal audits. And I know that, normally there are just things you catch, but I just want to make sure that he has the resources he needs so that we're right where we need to be. And maybe, helping to send the message throughout the council that managers and directors have to be responsive to audit, because we want to make sure that we're complying, and I will just stop there.
Madam Chair, that's an excellent point, and I will also have you recall the June budget amendment where we did increase resources for audit in $500,000, and in this budget there is also more resources for our internal audit team.
Great, thank you.
And that does conclude my presentation for today.
Okay, well, this was a lot of work, and I know you've been working on it for a while, and there's still a little ways to go. So can you just remind me, I know you said in August the council will get the full presentation, the committees will get various pieces of the budget from each of the divisions, and then the adoption has to be before, the preliminary levy adoption has to be before September 1st?
That's correct. So we'll go August 9th to the council, and then the following meeting there'll be a formal business item to approve the levy at that point, because that would be 2 weeks before September 1st. And again, we can always lower that levy. We cannot raise it after September 1st.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, I don't want to take too much time, but that date changes. What is that date set to, that levy adoption date? Sometimes it's the middle of September and you can pick up a September meeting. I'm just like, I thought, wow, that's early this year. Is there anything going on with that?
September 1st is the
Has it always
date,
been the
Madam
date?
Chair, in
Okay.
legislation.
Oh, okay. Maybe
It's to help the counties to set their truth and taxation statements out
Okay.
to the homeowners.
Okay, great. Are there any questions for Marie on this? Well, great work. I know that's a lot of work rolled into this by everybody across the council, and regional administration has a lot going on, and we have a lot of change going on, but it's all good, forward progress. So I appreciate this detail, and we look forward to, the next presentation to the council, and certainly before the committees that we all also serve on. So thank you, Marie. Appreciate it. Yep, great work.
Thank you.
All right, without objection, we'll move on now to, as you mentioned earlier, advancing equity thrive projects in the region, and Marie's going to give us that update as well.
Well,
do
actually,
you have
Madam
more?
Chair, I'm just going to kick this presentation
Okay.
off. There is, and today, because of time, we've split this presentation into two. We're
Okay.
focusing on Metro Transit and MTS, where they will present, since we gave the equity grants in 2021 and 2022, and where we are on spending and outcomes and any roadblocks or things that we have worked on. So I will turn it over to Charles and team. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Charles Carlson, Executive Director for MTS. Excited to share a few updates of 3 programs that we are advancing with these funds. Heidi Schalberg will cover 2 of them, and I'll cover 1 of them. But Heidi, feel free to introduce yourself and take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. So I'm Heidi Schalberg. I'm a planning analyst in MTS Planning. Amy Benowitz, our planning director, is the project manager for the equity evaluation of regional transportation investment project that I'll be talking about first. She's out today. 2 of us on her staff, myself and Jed Hansen, are also staff support on this project, so can speak. So I'm presenting in her absence today. So we received a $420,000 grant from the council to do this equity evaluation of regional transportation investment. So this is to help us create an evaluation tool and work with community-based equity policy group to provide us with specific recommendations for how we can change our investment and project selection processes to become, so the processes, the decisions, and the outcomes are more equitable. So just the financial part, just to provide you a little bit of updated numbers, checking the invoices, we've spent just under $300,000 of the $420,000 to date. We do anticipate receiving another invoice soon that would put us closer to that $325,000, and we do anticipate expending the full council grant this year. So as I mentioned, we're working with a consultant team and a community-based equity policy group to do this work. So we do have 2 ex officio members from the council and MnDOT on that group as well. So Councilmember Chambliss is the member representing the council on the policy group. We are compensating the main members, not the ex officio members, of course, for their time and expertise in this process. And we have met with them 8 times so far in this project. I'm going to go to the next slide. I'll say that process and that group, it's a fantastic group to work with. I'll say that it's the first time we've really done something like that in MTS. And so one of the challenges that we've had with this project is just realizing that we really kind of significantly underestimated the amount of time that it takes for the consultant team to organize and support and run those meetings with the equity policy group and community members. So we kind of have a little bit more of the schedule outline. We'll be happy to talk about that if you'd like. I'll say one of the things we are working on is a contract amendment to this that we hope to be able to bring to the full council later this month. Just kind of in recognition of some of those additional challenges that we've had and some additional tasks that we've added to add some training for the intended users of the tool once this project is completed. So that contract amendment would be done using MTS reserve funds, my understanding.
And just so would you be going over the $420,000 award, or are you just talking about a contract amendment for something you've already secured, or what does that mean?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would be going over the total cost of the $420,000. The $420,000 was the grant amount originally given to us from the council. So we would be increasing the total budget in the contract, but using funds that MTS has through the reserves.
Okay, and you have that money budgeted then as well for projects like this?
Yes, we do, Madam Chair. So the work of running this this process, there's been significant education, there's been significant capacity building, but the great thing is that the group has really hit its stride, and the inputs that we're getting for transportation process improvement are going to be invaluable as we continue this. So, investing in equity work, which is really an underlying component of this initiative, is paying dividends in terms of the insights and the experiences that we're able to bring into our perspectives as we're continuing this work. So it's been a good process in that regard.
That's good, and I would just add, there's learning along the way. So whether it was we as a council didn't budget enough time for this, or the consultant didn't, I mean, I think you're iterating and learning and doing as you go, right? So that's also helpful, I think, as we move forward and do other programs like this, perhaps.
Madam Chair, just on that, thanks. And I don't know if just a brief primer on this whole program for the new council members.
Yeah, that would be great.
Would be helpful, and I'm just trying to remember, thinking back, and we've seen a lot of numbers since then, but wasn't the original request more than $420,000 for this project? Or I felt like there was some kind of manipulating the numbers as we got closer to approving these advancing equity grants.
Councilmember Lilligren, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I do remember, I think maybe former council member Chris Ferguson, thank you. Wow. I think we had the list and we were kind of making some adjustments along the way. Okay. So if we don't have that information now, maybe we could get that out to the members of the group later. That'd be great, because that was a good point.
Thanks.
Yeah. And again, there was money that we made available because of the high priority of equity work here at the council. And then the teams throughout the council and divisions could come forward and determine what type of work that they thought there might be needed. And then this was the one that was coming forward from transportation. That is too high of a level discussion, just keeping an eye on the time. But Marie, if you want to touch on that.
Real quick. So this was a 2-year process. The total amount allocated was $420, but it was over a 2-year period. And you allocated additional money the second year. So that is the total.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. Anything else, Councilmember Cedarberg?
Thank you. Well, I think I appreciate your comment about maybe taking it back up a little bit for us new council people. What exactly is the regional transportation investment process? So how is that defined? Just in a couple sentences.
Sure, thank you, that's a great question. So we have a lot of different processes, you know, as far as how do you identify, how does a light rail project, you know, get to the point of actually being constructed, right? How do we identify a bus rapid transit project? We have local projects as well, whether that's a bike lane, a bike trail, a shared use trail, or a highway interchange. So they kind of go through some different processes. They're not all the same kind of process to identify what the need is.
So it's like a selection process?
Yeah, just kind of the overall process is kind of how do we even define the need for these projects, and then kind of what do those processes look like as far
That's
as
what I was thinking.
prioritizing. So one of them, for example, is regional solicitation that we do in MTS. So that's federal funding. So that's just one of the processes.
Okay, that's what I assumed, but it was good to.
No, great question.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, I'll cover the next one, which is the regional fleet zero emission bus and infrastructure evaluation. This project is complete. It received $70,000 from this work and about as much from separately planned funds for the initiative. This really built on work that Metro Transit had done in completing a zero emission bus plan that was supported by a state appropriation. This process really built on Metro Transit's plan to create that for the roughly 1,150 buses in the MTS and suburban provider fleets. And so the project is done. The council adopted the plan in May. And really the next steps in terms of the plan results are to continue forward with a few different initiatives. One is through continuing pilot projects that will likely initially focus on suburban provider fleets. And the reason for that is they own their own bus garage facilities. The rest of ours are really contracted out. In many cases, investing in the electrification infrastructure is actually the primary effort of electrifying a fleet, at least currently. And doing that can be a multi-year process with a much longer payback period. And if we're doing that for contracted services that really typically only have a 5-year operation life to them, it just may not align well with our business practices. So we do have the opportunity where there's publicly owned garages in the suburban fleets that we can continue pilot programs. But what this has shown for us is the need to actually take a look at our ownership and operation practices. Does it make sense to have contractors be fully responsible for garages, not just from an electrification standpoint, but also from an ongoing competition standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, from an asset management standpoint? So another aspect of our next steps will be to actually do a study of both operations and facilities. How does it make sense? How can we ensure a level playing field for competition? Might it make sense for the council to move toward facility ownership for contracted services? We don't know, but it's one of the next steps that we'll be looking at over the next year. I believe it's actually currently out for bid for RFP on the study process. The other thing that we're doing is looking at what happens with the development of fleet. Currently, electric buses are primarily the large, the 40-foot type transit bus variety. It's a fairly well-developed, if not fully mature market. The small bus space, where most of the MTS buses, about 700 of the 1,100 buses that we own, are small buses. There's 40,000 small buses in the United States. One is an electric bus in service. And so it's a very, compared to a big bus, it's a very new space, lots of risk, lots of unknowns. We're not quite ready to dive into that because we would have to own roughly 3 times the fleet size based on the available range of what's really not yet a commercially available product. And so there's quite a bit of time to see that market mature. But at the same time, we replace those buses every 5 years. So when that product becomes available, we're not, a bus we buy this year, we're not married to for 12 or 14 years. It's something that we could turn over quickly when the market develops for that type of bus. So the other finding of the study is really to keep an eye on that space and see where we can innovate where possible, but not quite move full steam ahead until there's really something we can buy.
And I just have to say, this is really awesome, and it's fascinating because there's a lot of pressure for us to electrify our fleet. And I know some of that comes from the legislature for sure, and there's stakeholders out there. But it has to be done in a methodical way where we can meet the market and time this thing. And even to your point about should we own the assets or not, right? So I really am digging this. And it might frustrate some folks that we can't move faster, but I think this is the approach to get it right. Because otherwise you can make a mess of it if you don't do it in the proper sequence or own proper assets. So I think this is very cool work. Yeah.
One more from MTS, and Heidi will cover it.
Thank you. So our third project, this project is expected to be completed later this year. So this involves us working with a consultant who is helping us to develop a tool so that we can estimate where in the region, different parts of the region, there's potential where people could shift potentially from driving a vehicle to making the same trips by transit, walking, or biking. So in our own lingo, we're referring to this as far as where we can estimate potential to reduce vehicle miles traveled and the connected greenhouse gas emission reduction from that. So this is work that we need to help inform our work as we are expecting to be developing and adopting targets for reducing those vehicle miles traveled, and will also help inform our infrastructure investments in transit, walking, and biking. So I'll note a couple of things about this project financially. So the work is about 80% complete, and we expect to be able to present results from this study in the third quarter of this year. So it may look like we're underspending on that from the amounts that you see on that. That is really in a large part due to the structure. We're working with the University of Kentucky and just kind of their billing and contracting structure. They will be doing larger invoicing amounts toward the end of the project. So that's where that will come into play. And we do also, the original grant amount was for $150,000. The contract was for a lower amount, so we do anticipate by the completion of this project to be returning a little over $19,000 to the council that was not needed.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Any questions on that at all? No? Okay. All right, and then we've got and thank you for all that work. And I think all of us, certainly, I'm sure the transportation committee, they might be a little more in the know than the rest of us, but it's just so interesting to see then when these are actually implemented or some of these tools come into play, and then we can start to measure the impact on the region just with those tools. So great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we are going to talk about maintenance technician training, which was also very cool. So welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm Jeremiah Reiter, the Assistant Director of Technical Support for Bus Maintenance, Metro Transit. My pronouns are he, him. I get the pleasure to update you on the apprenticeship program. The Registered Apprenticeship Program is made up of internal, external applicants or participants at this point. The program did start in January of this year and is made up of 14 participants. One participant did end up withdrawing from the program, which leaves us with 13 participants today. We have remaining funds in the amount of $35,875.34. These funds are going to go towards tools that we currently have on purchase, and once that invoice is processed through, those remaining funds will be used up.
Great. And does anyone have any questions on this?
Yeah.
Councilmember Lilligren.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please
Go
go first.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Frederick. Just if you could refresh my memory, please. I thought we had a more detailed presentation on the maintenance technician training, and that somebody asked, or there was the data point that some of these people who had participated in the apprenticeship program had actually been hired, or do we know that? I thought we asked that question before, and there were there were some, like 2 of them or something. Am I remembering?
So this program is new for Metro Transit. It's just starting this year.
Oh, all right. So these 13.
So maybe it was some past
must
program
be, yeah,
too.
okay, all right. Thank you.
There may be another program that's upcoming in this presentation.
Brian's nice.
Cool.
So yeah. And the program, the training program ends when?
So it's Madam Chair, committee members, it's a 3-year program.
Oh.
So we'll renew the program on a 2-year basis, starting a new cohort, or sooner if we're able to.
And Councilmember Cedarberg, and then I'll have another follow-up question. Go ahead.
And my question was, out of the 14 participants, how many were internal and external? And then was there any significant issue as to why the person withdrew? And then the makeup of the 14 participants as far as being people of color or when gender and genders and things like that.
Sure. Madam Chair, committee members, so the makeup of the participants it was 7 internal participants and 7 external participants. And as far as the diversity of the program, it's a very diverse program, making up of different genders, different ethnicities, and ages and things of that nature. So it is a very diverse program, which is very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. And then my question too is, seeing, again, we've just started this, but as we measure success along the way, not now, but as we continue to get reports on how you're doing and all that kind of stuff, it'll be interesting to see, if this then becomes a permanent program, if we see that pipeline, either for advancement internally or bringing new people in externally, since we've had stresses there, and we were bringing on new lines, so there'll be a lot more work for people to do. So I'm hopeful that it'll be something that we can work with more permanently going forward, but it'll be no pressure to just, because what really happens is what really matters, right? With the learning that comes out of it and everything, so.
Absolutely, Madam Chair, committee members, that's the idea, that's the hope. We do see this program as one of our greatest hiring strengths and bringing our employees up, upskilling what they have to currently bring to the table. So, yeah, time will tell, but as it is right now, we're seeing as a great strength of the council and hiring of technicians.
Great. Are there any other questions on this? All right, good
Thank you
work.
very much.
I really appreciate it. And I'm just very grateful for all these reports. We'll be getting more because it's just so important, when you put money out there, grants, authorizations, and everything like that. It's just important again to get this kind of feedback together today. So we've got the expanding multicultural market reach and frequency.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair. Bruce Howard, Director of Marketing and Transit Information at Metro Transit. And as you said, this particular grant was funding expanding our multicultural marketing reach and frequency. And just to kind of ground us here to start with, the way we refer to multicultural marketing, I'm sure you all probably have an idea of what that is, but we like to call it marketing strategy that recognizes the differences in culture and ethnicities of our target market, and in this case, the region that we serve. And so this grant was $150,000. We've spent, I believe, all of it now. It looks like on the slide we were a few $1,000s short of that, but I believe my staff told me we've spent all of that. So the grant funded 4 particular projects, and I'll cover those fairly quickly here because I see we're kind of running short of time. But the first project was completing some BIPOC focus groups. And again, for those of you who maybe don't know the acronym, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And the idea here was to get a better understanding of the media usage of Black, Hispanic, Hmong, Somali members of our community and the role that the culturally specific media plays and how they get information. And so there's a report that's out on MetNet if you want to go see that. That report was done in the summer of 2021. I don't have time to go into a lot of the key pieces of it, but suffice it to say we've got some really good information, and that helped us move into project number 2, which is setting up these annual contracts with 10 BIPOC media vendors. And so one of the things that we wanted to do here, we've used BIPOC media vendors in the past, but we've never had annual contracts where we kept the Metro Transit message and kind of our brand out in front of those communities. And so that was what we wanted to do, and that's what this grant allowed us to do, which is set up these 10 contracts. And then we would use those contracts to go ahead and promote various things. That might be our operator hiring campaign, it might be our summer student pass, it might be our quarterly route and service changes. So whatever it might be, we were able to then use those contracts. And just to give you an idea of some of the media here that we had those contracts with, Minneapolis Spokesman Recorder, KMOJ Radio, La Raza Radio, KALY, which they tell me is the first Somali language radio in America, I guess, and others. So just to give you a sense of who we had those partnerships with. The good news here also is that you see in 2023 we set up 11 contracts with BIPOC Media, and so we used a little bit of the money that was left in this grant, but we also then used money from our marketing budget to go ahead and fund those as well. So again, it went really well, and we thought this was a really good investment as we continue down this path. So I think that's a good result of having this equity grant to kind of help us go in that direction. Real quickly then, the third project here was an MCUB marketing campaign. And so the idea here, we partnered with OEEO and created a campaign to recruit more vendors into the MCUB program here at the council. So we ran a flight of digital ads and some radio underwriting, including at some of these BIPOC stations that I mentioned here. We had 3 flights, as you see there, one in November of 2021, one in February of 2022, and then November of 2022. And each time we were able to drive more traffic to the council's webpage that has the MCUB information, and we could see that we had hundreds more visits. So we thought that was really relatively effective as well. And I don't know the overall number of MCUB vendors, but maybe someone has that off the top of their head. But we thought that was a pretty effective project as well. And then finally, just real quickly, the Creative Services Collaboration Fund, we called it. This is something that we did with our Creative Services group in Metro Transit Marketing. The idea here was to bring in more diverse perspectives to our graphic design, where sometimes it's hard to hire that diversity, but we can certainly go out and contract for it. And so that's what we did here, is we partnered with a local artist, Leah Jackson, and she produced 5 illustrations for us, including the one you see here, which is an example. Lee Jordan, who's the longtime Juneteenth kind of founder and organizer here in town. And so that showed up on 16 Super Kings, which are the ads that are on the sides of our buses. So again, all in all, we thought very good use of those dollars, and we're pretty happy with the outcome.
Great, I appreciate that. Any questions on this?
Not a question, but just a comment. So
Yeah.
thanks for the report. I just want to note that with these year-long contracts with BIPOC Media, they're not huge, right? But they really have impact in the community, and that community members pay attention to this and literally track who's spending what at what different media outlets. I know when I was a candidate running for election, they knew exactly how much my campaign had spent at each of these BIPOC media outlets. So we get a lot more sort of goodwill and relationship building from a fairly small investment.
Yeah, I think that's great. I really appreciate this work, and the point is very well taken. The traffic was increased, we know we had interest, and then we'll have to see, did it result in more vendors? And I know we still have work to do there. So the thing that, that gap is, okay, if we didn't get more vendors, then what are the barriers? But we're pushing more people, right? It's a continuum. So that pipeline, getting them in the pipeline and keeping them in the pipeline until we can get them contracts in hand. So this is very good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then if you wouldn't mind, just send that link out to that report. To the committee, and if anybody's interested in browsing that.
Madam Chair, you can go to MetNet and find it if you go, if I have more, you can go to the MetNet site, Council MetNet site, Metro Transit Marketing and Transit Information Division, and then Research Reports, and it should be there. And I can send it.
I don't think many of us are going to MetNet.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, if you, and then one more question.
I have one
I'm
more
sorry.
question. So on your media contracts, those are with Metro Transit. So can we share those or expand those across Council, for other kinds of media contracts that we might need as well?
And Terry was here earlier.
But anyway, so that would be.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Council Member, I think if you're referring to the contract's in place for a year and we change out the subject matter, and we certainly can change it out to be a council subject matter as opposed to just a Metro Transit subject matter, if that's what you're asking.
Yep.
We have the ability to do that.
But let the other people know that these contracts are in place. That,
Oh, yes.
So
And Equal
perfect.
Opportunity is tracking all this money that's going
Perfect.
to, I think, some of our spend. Yes.
Thank you.
Councilman Hanson.
I just want to say I'm glad that you have some Somali media also included this one, because I see a lot of our community have language barrier. So I'm glad to see that you included this one. If you can get me the list, all the list that media would be great.
Sure, absolutely. I can, Madam Chair, council members, I can send that to Phil or just, okay.
I'll
send
it
to Laura. Yep, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll do that, yep.
Thank you, great presentation.
Sure.
And here's the deal, we're gonna go, because this committee gets an hour and 15 minutes. We don't get 2 hours like the rest of the committee, so we're gonna cram this in. Greg, I know you've got to flip things over, but we're gonna just quickly touch on these other two, and then Phil's gonna make a 1-minute statement. But I just at least want to touch on it today, because what we found out in this committee is we get these really, good agendas, but we've got an hour and 15 minutes, and this committee needs to have the full time that it needs. So we've been talking a little bit about how to address that. But Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, committee members, Brian Fung, Chief Operating Officer at Metro Transit. It's good to be here today. We do have here a light rail vehicle technician pathway program that we're attempting to model after the bus operator apprenticeship program. There's not a formal apprenticeship program per se for that light rail vehicle technician, and so this is an attempt to establish a first year of the program to be able to onboard a staff member to lead that program and really bring together our joint labor management committee. We've not yet spent money on that. We had fits and starts. We started working on the formation of the program. On the labor side, they had some members who started in the committee and then dropped out for various reasons. And so right now we're working on bringing folks back to the table. Again, I think that we do have some promise. We certainly have needs. It's a promising framework that we can build on. But we've not yet been able to draw down funds. And so I think as this committee looks at the whole of everything that's being done, we'd like to be able to keep this going and continue to get after it. But right now we just don't have a lot to show in the money side of things. So yeah, that's my very brief summary. Happy to come back on the 26th and describe more.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I'm not completely surprised at the difficult start. And I don't know if we've got an end date on these grant programs, but this is one like the others, but this is one definitely that we want to continue to push forward. So if there are extensions, or I don't even know if there are extensions, you guys will tell us. But yeah, hang in there, and we need everybody at the table. So hopefully that message is being conveyed. Everybody needs at the table.
Thank you.
Okay, great. And anything else on that? And then last but not least, ticket vending machine training.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. My name is Aaron Koski, Senior Manager of the Workforce Development Department. Very happy to come and report our progress for this equity award of, $90,000. We have under contract the full amount of $90,000 with Hennepin Technical College. This program, training program, is to support the revenue team over at Transit, as they have a group of 15 technicians who service the ticket vending machines on BRT and light rail lines. We designed and developed a training program, like an apprenticeship but different, where 3 new employees are entering into this role and learning the job and going to receiving academic instruction from accredited institution for a year and a half. One of our trainees is a he was a transit employee for 15 years almost, and had an opportunity to advance. And then we brought 2 individuals from outside and they represent our first ever, I believe, female technician, as well as a young man from the Native American community. So very happy to report that all 3 are advancing very well in their training. They're about 30% done. And we're very happy, and this is also a great program because this will be replicated as our system grows. The need for these types of specialized technicians will continue, and we're developing a great model that can be replicated moving forward.
That's awesome. That's great. Anybody got questions on this? I mean, that's exciting. And as technology changes and everything, we've still got a system in place that we can continue to move people through, and I think it's fantastic. And again, diverse workforce. So perfect. Okay, now, if there is, did anyone else have anything on this? Okay, so all we have left, thank you very much for that great report. At this point in time, I'm just going to turn it over to Phil to just briefly talk about the work plan. So I know Councilmember Cedarberg, who was great in her questions, as always, had said, hey, can we get a look at the work plan? And I said, hey, do we have a work plan? So we're working on the work plan. So Phil, why don't you bring everybody on this committee up to speed, even though not everybody's here, but I think your question has really spurred something that was necessary, and I think it'll get us in the right place in a certain amount of time.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. So this is really a continuation of that question. We wanted to make sure that The work plan that we put out for the management committee is meaningful, has value. Historically, it has been just, I shouldn't say just, it's been a list of.
No, it's just been.
It's just been a list of the items that will be coming up in future meetings. I think we should continue with that. Obviously, it gives committee members a chance to take a look at what's on the agendas coming up. But I think to take that maybe to the next step, and in these meetings when business items or information items are presented, and you want to have follow-up, you may have seen some today, we want to see what the impact this has maybe in a year or whatever this group decides. That goes into the work plan as well, so that everyone knows this is the metric that we're looking at. This is the timing that we'll come back to present to the management committee, so everyone's on the same page. So it's not only a list of the agenda items, but it's also updates and impacts that previous business items that you've acted on. You can make sure that you're staying on top of those and ask any questions that might come up. So it's really, if that's the direction that you think makes sense, I'd like to continue in that direction. If you want to take a look at maybe some other approach to this, we could easily do that as well.
Yeah, well, just, if you have thoughts, email it to Phil. I think one of the things I was just interested in is, we're authorizing, and then what is the impact? And as a body that pushes a lot of money through our budget system with our authorization to the full council, it helps us to also tell our story, right? And work with our team to say, hey, this is an important story. There were many, many stories in this tonight, right? And then in addition to the stories, like, okay, what was the data? What's the data coming out of this and the impact? How are we actually moving the needle when it comes to MCOP hirings? How are we actually moving the needle with new people coming into the workforce for training and or technician work? All of the things that we're investing in, more data and results, I think would be helpful. And if there's any nuance or big things that you want to add to that, get it to Phil. We'll just kind of workshop it a little bit and bring it back for everybody to, and certainly staff will be involved, like meet, because there's so much going on here, and instead of rubber stamping in an hour and 15 minutes and we just move things along, just have a little more depth and, how did that $6 million go that we authorized a year ago, or, those kinds of things. Sound good?
Yeah, it sounds really good. So thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Phil, for this. And in my little nonprofit, which is nowhere near the size of this, we're doing this exact same thing right now. So it feels very familiar. And Phil, I'm just trying, the way you kind of outlined what we're going to do and the process and what's going to happen, especially when we get to sort of the evaluation part of it, that's different from what we've been doing, right?
Yes, Madam Chair, committee members, it is different. And it's just a way I think it'd be nice to look at this work plan that we have, and it would give you the opportunity when, let's say a new business item or information item is presented, we can talk about what is that metric we want to take a look at, what is the impact that we want to be measuring. That's been a big topic of discussion as I've taken over these roles with the directors of regional administration and the shared services. How do we measure what we do? How can we report that? Because there's a lot of good things. There are a lot of good things going on here, so we want to make sure we're able to report that. So it is new, yes.
Yeah, thanks. And Madam Chair, if I may, just having gone through a process with bigger organizations while getting down to these, whatever you want to call them, key progress indicators or whatever, that's a lot of work itself. And so I just want to kind of manage our expectations that we don't think you're going to be able to wave a magic wand and we'll have this in place, but
I'm expecting a magic.
Okay, I like that. I like magical stuff to show, but getting these down so they're useful to us, useful to the organization. I really look forward to this. Thank you for your leadership.
Oh, for sure. And honestly, I think it's just some common sense for anybody who's served in any kind of an organization, whether it be public, private, nonprofit. You put your budgets forward, and at the end of the year do some sort of annual report. We have those general things here, but this committee should, for the most part, know, are we on the right track with our investments? Should we be switching that? We're partnering with our staff on this as the policymakers. So I think it'll be fun to see where we end up with this, and really appreciate the staff's hard work on it. And Bill, I think you're doing a great job. Hats off to you. It's been already great in these just several weeks working with you to kind of get us in a kind of a new groove.
And I'd just like to say thank you for responding to my question, because it was just, so we can have a little bit of a further look out, so planning for our personal time as well as to what's coming up, how do we need information and things like that, plus the accountability, so.
And again, I know we're up against time, but We are, you know, I'm working with Phil, again, we're all very busy people, we don't need extra trips to St. Paul, so I like having the management committee back to back with the full council meeting, but it really only gives us an hour and 15 minutes, and that's interesting, because sometimes we just struggle with that.
And I don't, Madam Chair, I don't know if this was discussed, during COVID, we met at 2, right? We were meeting
Yes.
remotely, so it was
Yes.
a different thing, and I don't know if there is
Yeah.
consideration there, because it does feel like of all the committees I serve on, this is the one, or the two, this is the one that kind of gets short-shrift.
And so actually, you know, it was a thought, we chatted about too, we thought, well, maybe if there's a special need, we could move it. But that gets difficult too, a one-off and a one-off, because nobody can plan around that, right? So
Scheduling's
more to
hard enough for
come, more to
me.
come. Maybe a little survey to everybody, ask them what they think about that.
Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, Councilmember Osmer.
Just, you know, we can move to from 2:30 to 2 o'clock, so we can have more time.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
just half an hour.
We'll ask the rest of the members if they think that'd be okay, and our bosses if we have to.
We don't wanna, rush.
Yeah, it helps. We don't wanna meet another day.
Right, and really, now that we're meeting in person again, just having some of that sort of social FaceTime with our council
Yeah.
colleagues is useful, so we miss out on that.
Yeah. All right,
Thanks.
great, thanks for all the input, thanks to staff, and with that, meeting is adjourned.